Hello everyone, welcome to this particular session where I'll be taking you through the introduction to the data protection. My desire is that at the end of this particular session, we will have an understanding of the principles of the data protection, the importance, and also some of the best practices that we can actually adopt to ensure that we are protecting our company data and also our personal data. Thank you. So my name is George Njuguna. By profession, I am a cybersecurity practitioner or a cybersecurity leader in my organization, and I have had the privilege of working in the digital transformation, AI, data privacy, information, and cybersecurity space for some time now. And I hope to share some of my experiences and knowledge so that we can grow together and that we can better protect our data at a personal level, but also at an organizational level. So thank you and welcome to work with me in this particular journey. To begin with, by defining what data protection is. But again, as you might be aware, or as you can see from the slides, we have two words, that is data, and then we have protection. So we begin by defining what data is. So data is any information relating to unidentified or identifiable natural person that we normally call in the data privacy space as the data subject. So anything, any information that can actually help to identify a natural person, that is actually data. For example, a name can actually identify you as a natural person. An email address, an IP address, your car's registration number. So all these, they're actually information relating to you as a person, as a natural person, or as an identifiable person. And we normally call you in this particular context as a data subject. So that is data. And then we have protection. So protection thereof, therefore, is now the efforts aimed at protecting this kind of information to ensure that it is safeguarded from abuse, unauthorized access, modification, to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I'll be mentioning about that, or I'll be expounding on that in the course of this particular session. So in a nutshell, data protection, basically, these are efforts aimed at safeguarding any information that is relating to you as a natural person. And I can attempt to define this in or from point of view, or from three perspectives. One is ensuring the privacy, integrity, and availability of data. So when you talk about the privacy, this is actually the aspect of the principle of confidentiality, causing information, cyber and data privacy and protection. We usually safeguard three most important principles. That is the confidentiality or the privacy, the integrity, and also availability. So privacy or confidentiality is the principle of ensuring that this data or this information relating to a particular person, natural person, is actually safeguarded from unauthorized access. And then, of course, we have integrity, which is the principle of ensuring that this information is consistent. You don't have one type of information that is different from another form. For example, you collect an information relating to a natural person that is capturing them as this, but when that particular information is transmitted or at rest, it's actually intercepted and modified. Either some aspect of it is added or removed to lose meaning, or for the personal vendetta. So we also have the principle of availability, or rather part of the CIF triad is availability, and which is the principle of ensuring that this particular information is actually available when needed and to the people that actually needs it, like people with legitimate reasons to actually access this information. And then of course we have another definition that we can actually use to define the data protection. So that is on the prevention from the unauthorized access or a misuse. So we find that this information that is relating to any identifiable natural person, it's an important aspect that needs to be protected. And actually, the reason as to why we are saying this is because data nowadays is the new oil, it's the new jewel. We normally call it as the crown jewel. So initially, we used to have countries having minerals like oils, copper, and all that being, the most important or the most coveted thing or a commodity. But nowadays, things have changed, and data is actually the new gold, the new oil, the new mineral, and so we need to protect it at whatever cost. And so the prevention of unauthorized access or a misuse, so that can be a definition of data protection. And then we have the protection both personal and organizational data. So when you talk about protecting data at a personal level, so this is the personal data that we normally have it probably on the social platforms. So that is the protection of that personal data, data that is relating to you as a person. And then, of course, we have the organizational data, which is data belonging to an organization. So, in a nutshell, that is basically the definition of data protection. And in the next slide, I would like for us to understand why the data protection is actually important. To help us answer the question, why do we need to protect the data in the first place, and from whom are we protecting this data from? So one is on the rising number of data breaches. Maybe just to give context, we've had quite a number of organizations, individuals being compromised, and this kind of data ending up in the wrong hands. So a case in point, late January this year, and this is in the Kenyan context. So in Kenya, we normally have BRS or the Business Registration Services. So the Kenya Business Registration Service unfortunately experienced a cyber attack that was able to expose sensitive information of numerous private companies. So the BRS usually hosts a lot of information and even sensitive information when individuals registers their businesses. And so as a result of this breach, a lot of sensitive data was actually leaked. And so this can be part of the rising number of breaches and forming part of the reason as to why we need to do everything possible to ensure that we are protecting the data. Another example that I can give still within the African context is the African property company, Palm Golden Properties, which is a South African company. And in the month of March, around 7th of March 2025, they actually confirmed that there was a data breach and it resulted to unauthorized access to some of the personal information stored in their customer relationship management system or the CRM system. So find that there are this property organization. They usually have a lot of information relating to their clients, and so whenever a breach occurs, it actually usually have a lot of impact on the company in terms of data, branding, and everything. So in this particular case, for this organization, it was breached, and the threat actors or the hackers were able to get access to personal information. And then maybe just to also create or to give us a picture, we can also now go to Morocco, whereby we had the social security database breached, where significant cyber attacks were able to breach, and the hackers were able to, leak sensitive personal data on Telegram. That is from the Moroccan, that is from the social security data breach in Morocco. Maybe this and much more can actually be able to paint to us a picture of the rising number of data breaches. And nowadays, the narrative has actually changed. So previously, we used to say, or rather to ask if we can be breached or compromised or hacked. But now that conversation has switched or shifted to when. So it's a matter of time, like when can we be? When can this happen to our organization? So the other reason as to why we need to protect data is actually to protect individual privacy rights. So every individual enjoys rights enshrined in some of the jurisdiction, constitutions, and other frameworks. For example, we are entitled or have the right to privacy, the right to worship, the right to, or rather, even the freedom of speech and such. So when it comes to the privacy world, um, we usually have some of these, acts, like the Parliament Act, the bills, giving the data subjects, rights to privacy. And so, for us to be able to protect the individual's privacy rights, we need to ensure that we are doing everything possible to protect the data. And then finally, just to maintain the organizational trust and compliance. So we can all agree with me that whenever a data breach happens to an organization, um, they actually, leaves a dent, like in form of, having their trust lost, and even from the compliance point of view, attracting litigations and fines. So it is very important for us as organization or people that works with some of these organizations to actually ensure that we are maintaining this organizational trust and compliance by ensuring that we are doing everything possible to ensure that this information or this data is actually safeguarded. Then I want to introduce some key terms to us to be able to help us understand better the data protection. So we have the personal data, and this we are saying that it's the information that can identify a person. So I was giving an example of a name, your identification card, your address, physical address where you live, your car registration number. So all these, whether um, separately or combined with other information, if they are able to identify you as a person, so we call them personal data. And at times we normally call them PII, or a personally identifiable information. And then we have now the data controller, which is an entity or an individual that determines how data is actually used. And their work is to collect, process, and transmit this data with the data processors, which we'll be looking at next, and to be able to tell them what they need to do with this particular data. And then, of course, we have the data processor, which is an entity that processes data on behalf of a data controller. So this entity or individuals, their work is to take instructions from the data controller on how they're actually meant to process the data subject data. I can give you a practical example. We have an organization and then it has employees. So these employees need to remit tax to the government. And so we have, for example, um, uh, revenue authorities needing to be receiving the tax returns. So you have that you have an organization with the HR department. They will now be, in this case, be the data controllers. In this particular case, the data controllers will be now the organization or the employers, and the data processor now will be the government revenue authority that is actually processing this particular information on behalf of the organization. Another example is an organization that usually shares information to the medical insurance parties. So in this particular case, now the company X, which is the employer, will transmit uh, that particular personally identifiable information to another company Y, which in this particular case is a medical insurance cover, that now will process this data on behalf of this company X, which is the employer. So that is the data processor. And of course, they will have the reason as to why they are processing, for example, to process a claim, to release a hospital payment bill. So that is how we can be able to better relate when it talks about the data controller or a data processor. And then finally, we have the consent, which is a freely given informed agreement to data processing. So here we have the personal data for the data subject, and now the data subject needs to freely give uh, informed agreement to data processing. So before the data controller determines how the data about the data subject is used, or before the data processor processes data on behalf of the controller, there has to be a consent which is freely given and informed to the data processing, so that you are not using personally identifiable information illegally and without the knowledge of the data subject. And then we have some legal frameworks that are actually out there to be able to help in some of these data protection efforts or practices. So one of them, and actually the most common one, is the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations for the European Union. We have others like the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act for the US region. And then of course we have a lot many more, including in our very own continent, that is Africa. So we have, maybe if I was to begin here home, Kenya, we have the Kenya Data Protection Act, which saw the institution of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. And it's a legal framework here in Kenya to be able to help the um, the data subjects. They have their rights protected. And then of course we have many other. In Tanzania we have the PDPC. In Zambia we have local and national laws which acts as a legal frameworks to be able to direct or guide on how some of these data subject rights are actually practiced and are protected. The other thing I would like for us to look at in this particular session is the principles of data protection. But then, what is a principles, or what can you define a principle as? We can say that principles, they're actually set of core rules and values that will actually guide how personal data should be, one, collected, used, stored, shared, just to ensure individual privacy and rights are actually respected. So we are saying that principles, they are values and rules that will actually guide data, and this data can be guided, especially when it's being collected, when it is being used, when it is being stored, or when it is being shared. So beginning with the GDPR, which is said is the most common, and actually from which most of these local frameworks and regulations have actually stemmed from. It actually stipulates or gives a number of principles that we can actually look at in this particular session. So the first one is law abiding, fairness, and transparency. So this is the principle of ensuring that whatever data or information about an individual is collected. First of all, it actually abides with the law. Secondly, it is actually used in a fair manner. And thirdly, it is a transparent exercise, so that you don't have the data subjects being in the dark about how their data is actually being used. So one of them, it has to comply with the laws of that particular jurisdiction. If there's a lawful basis of collecting a particular personally identifiable information, or if there are no lawful basis of collecting those particular information, that should actually be respected and upheld. And you normally find that there are those organizations or institutions that are actually given preference or right to actually have this particular access to the personally identifiable information. For example, the law enforcing agents, and especially when they're doing some forensics or investigations, the law courts, the government. So you find that there is that principle to ensure that whatever information or data about an individual that is collected actually is abiding with the law, and also the manner in which it is collected, it is stored, used, processed, transmitted, or even at rest is actually used in a fair manner, and also uh, in, um, in a transparent manner, so that the data subject can be fully informed or aware. And then the second one is on purpose limitation. So this is to reduce the purpose for collecting the data. So find that an organization X collects data about a particular subject for the purpose of sending them or processing their order or a request. And then you find that in addition to that, they still use the same information to send the promotional messages and unsolicited messages. Find that they are conversing the principle of purpose limitation, because ideally they are supposed to limit the purpose of that particular information or data to what they actually received consent for. And then of course we have the data minimization. So this is reducing the scope or the amount of data that is collected about an organization or an individual. So the more data you collect, the more the risk, because unless you are keen enough on protecting that particular data, you might lack visibility, the resources, and the capacity to actually protect all this data that you're collecting. So it is usually advised for you to minimize the the data that you're collecting, and that you should only collect data that is actually required or necessary, so that you don't collect more than necessary. And then also there's a principle of accuracy, and this is to ensure that the kind of information or data about an individual that is collected, stored, processed, used is actually accurate, so that you don't have conflicting information. For example, if I collect information about an individual X when they had the X number of assets or they had X number of years, so that is actually supposed to be reflected on the channels that I am actually storing, collecting, and processing or storing this information. And should there be any change in that particular data or information that I am having, so the data subject has the right to actually have their information being captured correctly and stored accurately. And then of course the storage minimization or a limitation. So the more storage locations you have, the more data or a personally identifiable information is scattered all over the storage locations, the more the risk you have to actually get the data breach. And then of course we have the principle of integrity and confidentiality. So we have begun by saying or talking about the CA triad, that is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the integrity is actually ensuring that that particular information is actually flowing, or that particular information is actually consistent, so that it is not intercepted or altered at some point, or modified. And then of course they have the principle of confidentiality, meaning that this particular information is actually accessed only by the people that needs access to that particular information. And then finally there's the principle of accountability, um, which now keeps on toes these data controllers or processors that are actually collecting, processing, storing, or using this particular information. keeping them accountable in terms of ensuring that they have the necessary safeguards or are controlled to protect the data. And the other thing, after we have understood what data is, what data protection is, and why we are protecting this data, the next question is how do we then protect this particular data? And we can be able to achieve this by looking at some of the strategies that we can actually borrow or get to ensure that we are protecting the data. One of them is actually the data protection. So this is the encryption or encapsulation of information or data to caution it from being intercepted or modified from one point to another. For example, I have particular information that I want to relay to a particular person. I need to ensure that the mode of communication, the channel that I use is actually encrypted. That's why you normally find that, for example, WhatsApp chat communication, they usually say that it is end-to-end encrypted so that there is no interception in between. There is no person is dropping in that particular conversation and tapping that particular information, ruling out the room for the MITMs, the man in the middle of attacks or interception or the modification, so that you can maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that particular information. And we have various forms of strategies that we can actually adopt from the disk encryption, the use of keys, where you need to actually ensure that you need the keys to decrypt or even the tokens. And then of course you have the access controls and authentications. So this could be logical or physical. Ensure that you are regulating the access to the particular information. From the physical point of view, of course, you have the lock and key, you have the biometrics, and of course from the logical point of view, we have the ACL, or that is the access control list, the access control system and tools that are usually put in place to ensure that they are controlling who is having access to which system, which information, and of course the strategy or the principle of authenticating and authorizing, confirming whether the person who is requesting the particular access is actually the person who is or who needs to get the particular access. And then of course we have the regular backups, ensuring that should the online or the main data is compromised, and especially when we talk about the ransomwares, whereby maybe your data is encrypted and you're required to give a ransom so that your data can be released, which actually don't even work in most cases. So most companies usually have a policies prohibiting the payment of the ransom, because at the end of the day, it's not even guaranteed that you'll get that your data back. So the sure bet is actually to ensure that you have a redundant client, like the offline data, that you can be able to power it on and be able to continue the operations. And that's why in this particular space we normally talk about the business continuity and resiliency. And then of course we have the employee training and awareness, because it's a chain, it's a link, and when one party is broken, it actually doesn't matter whether it was investment of how many $1 million in terms of the tools and everything. For so long as the attacker or the threat actor is able to get their way into the ecosystem through the human firewall, which normally says that it's the human link, you see, it will have an impact regardless whether you have a multi-million or investment of other tools. So you need to ensure that your employees, your staff, or you as a staff are actually receiving the necessary trainings, their awareness, because again, we are living in a never evolving threat landscape. So it's not a static one, like the way things were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, remains the same. So things are evolving quite pretty fast in the landscape, the emerging of trends, technologies, new risk. So you need to ensure that your people, the employee, are actually receiving the necessary training and awareness. And then of course we have the secure data disposal, and this is where most of us as individuals and as organizations go wrong. So you have a lot of investment in terms of the tools and everything. But again, when it comes to now the disposal of data, you dispose it anyhow. I normally see a lot of this. So there are no like shredders where you can be able to shred this information. I usually see it a lot, especially in malls, supermarkets. Whenever people shop, usually drop or dispose of those particular receipts, which usually have the information like their name, could be account details, the payment details. Also, another thing that I've seen is from the airports, whereby usually people after landing they usually dispose anyhowly those particular tags, forgetting that they have QR codes that you could actually scan and get some of this personally identifiable information. Even from the the digital point of view, as organization, you need to invest in secure data deletion, disposal, or archiving so that you are not losing some of this data through those particular forms and ways. Even in terms of the removable media like the flash disks, the hard drives, even before you dispose or reassign, you need to ensure that you have completely wiped out the existing data. And of course, we have some data breaches and their consequences. And the most common ones are the likes of phishing. So initially, we used to have people break into the banks, then they get away with money and all that. But that changed to things like hacking, whereby they can actually do it remotely. But that even changed further. Now the threat actors or the hackers, they don't even to go through the hassle of doing all that. They discover that they can actually use the human psychology to actually lure you to fall to their plan. So that is phishing. And then of course we have the hacking, which is an ethical access or compromise over some of this organizational ecosystem. It could be ethical for testing or unethical, and that's why we have the the white hat, the gray hat, the black hat, all these other teams. And then of course we have the accidental exposure. For example, you're online, you want to search a particular thing, and then accidentally you key in a sensitive information, or maybe you're using some of this generative text or AI like Grok, Gemini, ChatGPT, and all that. So you need to ensure that even the kind of information that you're sharing there is actually limited. So that you don't experience accidental exposure of some of this information. And remember, the internet never forgets. So you might get a reminder or something might and can actually be used against you or the organization based on the accidental exposure of the information. And then, of course, we have the legal consequences, the fines, the lawsuit, the litigation that we're talking about. So, of course, we have a lot of legal, statutory, and regulatory requirements. That's why we have the GRC, the Governance Risk and Compliance, to ensure that you are compliant to some of these regulations and laws. So, failure to do that, you, of course, risk being fined, attracting lawsuits, and all that. And then finally, the data breaches and consequences could have a business impact in terms of reputation damage, the loss of customer. Because again, we are saying that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So you need to ensure that you're protecting your organization from the reputation damage, the loss of customer. You are protecting them from the legal consequences, the fines, the lawsuits, and also at a personal level and also corporately ensure that you're protecting yourself from the common breaches like the phishing, the hacking, and the accidental exposure. Of course, for us to be able to achieve a mutual success as an organization, we need to define some roles and responsibilities. One of them is actually on the employees having to follow the policies and to be able to report incidents. So most of the organizations usually have the SOPs or the standard operating procedures to be able to govern the company. So if you have policy about a particular thing, how that particular asset is actually meant to be treated, assessed, and all that. So that is policies. We have procedures. We have the best practices. We have the playbooks. So all these are actually meant to guide staff and employees to ensure that there is a proper governance. And of course, organizations usually provide this in addition to the incident reporting channels and mechanisms. So it is the role of the employees or for you as an employee to ensure that you are conversant with these policies and with this reporting, incident reporting channels. And of course, we have the IT or the compliance team, the SOC team, the infrastructure team, and all these other teams. They have the responsibility of implementing and monitoring these controls. And then finally, you have the leadership. And their role in this particular case is support, ensuring they are supporting a culture of privacy, they're providing budget, they're providing anything that is required for the success of the data protection. And then, of course, we have the best practices for the individual. So we've spent some time looking at the best practices for organization. So as an individual, you can protect yourself, and especially when you're transacting online, by the use of a strong password. Nowadays, we have also what we call the MFAs, which is the multi-factor authentication, to ensure that even in all your social platforms and some of the the portals and they say that you visit, you actually use a strong password that are hard to guess. I think a research had been conducted. They were given turnaround time where the hackers or the actors, the threat actors, can actually, or the amount of time it actually takes them to break into your password based on their complexities. And so the more complex it is, the more safe it gets for you to ensure that it cannot be cracked. And then, of course, you have the cautious, taking cautious or applications with emails and links. You don't click just any email attachment or a link because it could be it could actually be a setup by the the threat actors to actually get you into clicking or downloading some of these attachments that will have them probably having keyloggers. They can actually steal your credentials or even be able to use that as the entry point to your platforms, online ones, and also to the organization ecosystem. And then, of course, you need to know your data rights. And of course, not many of us actually know their rights when it comes to the privacy or the data protection. So you need to be able to know your data rights. And then, of course, you need to review privacy settings from time to time. So most of these OEM, that is the original manufacturers, usually provide updates and they review their privacy settings from time to time because again we are saying at the end of the day that it's an ever-evolving threat landscape, and so things need to be changed frequently so that security can be the priority or the protection of that particular data can actually be upheld. Of course, I didn't want to give you an information overload, so that is what I had prepared for you. But of course, I am willing to engage you in questions and probably feedback in terms of how or which areas that I need to emphasize more. But in summary, I could say that as I always tell people that data protection is always everyone's responsibility. It is not for specific people or individuals or departments. It is actually a collective responsibility for all multi-stakeholders. And then, of course, there is a legal, ethical importance. So you need to pay that in mind. Get to understand what are some of the legal, statutory, regulatory requirements that we need to comply with as individual, as business, so that you can ensure that you are avoiding some of these penalties and litigation. And then, of course, we need to stay informed and vigilant because, again, we are saying that we are in an information age and we nowadays have a script kiddies, a lot of trends and technologies. Things are moving quite pretty fast, and so you can always do yourself favor by staying informed and vigilant, not clicking or falling for any links or materials that are shared. So you need to practice your due diligence and always trust your instincts and your gut feelings. And that, ladies and gentlemen, marks the end of my introduction to the data protection. I will pause here to take questions and to be able to provide clarity on any area that you feel that I need to put a lot of emphasis. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. I hope you've learned a thing or two. So let's continue protecting our data, both the personal and the company. Otherwise, thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity to interact with you guys and to take you through this. So let me know which questions I can respond to. I'll be more than happy to respond to that. My contact details in terms of LinkedIn handles and other contact information like emails, where you can always reach out, we connect, and we grow together safely as an organization or even as a community. So again, thank you so much. May you enjoy the remaining part of your day and week. Bye bye.